Share via email. Report story. Chapter 3. Izuku blinked himself awake, his head feeling enormously better. He sighed in satisfaction. He had always hated getting sick, it just incapacitated him too much. He sat up slowly as he realized his surroundings. This isn't my bedroom, he thought as he looked around. In fact, it was his living room. He had no idea how he had gotten in there in the first place, his memories from the day before still cloudy. He stretched his arms above his head and yawned. He had never slept that well before. Even though he had just slept on his couch with just a blanket, he woke up refreshed, filled with energy. He looked around and saw a folded piece of paper on the coffee table in front of him. He reached for it and unfolded it, finding a message written with very neat handwriting. Thank you for letting me spend the night. If you're not feeling well, don't hesitate to give me a call. He noticed the phone number right below the message and smiled, the initials, OU. Below it he was starting to remember a couple of things now. How Ochako helped him with the store, how she cooked dinner for him, how she worried over him and had helped him get better. He slowly got up and had a shower. There wasn't much to worry about since it was a Saturday, one of the 2 free days he had every week. He prepared himself a quick breakfast and went back upstairs, unsure of what to do with his time. His weekdays would usually be so hectic and filled with things to do that he felt useless in the weekends. He always felt like he had to do something but, as his mom had always reminded him, you need to work your hardest every day, Izuku, but you still have to find some time to rest. Weekends are a good option. But only those days. His heart tightened a little as he thought about his mom, but he quickly shook his head, forcing those thoughts to leave and, deciding he had nothing better to do, he got his phone and dialed the number that had been written on the tiny piece of paper. Hello, he heard as she answered. Hi, it's me, Midoriya. I just wanted to thank you for everything you did yesterday for me. It's nothing, she responded. You needed help, plus tending to the store was pretty fun too. Izuku smiled. I'm glad you had fun. The next time you swing by I'm going to have a whole bag of fresh bread for you as thanks. It's okay, Midoriya. Really? Nope, he said stubbornly. I've already made up my mind. He heard her sigh softly before saying, fine, how about I go for them today then? Izuku was completely caught off guard with that question, sure. He responded, not thinking Ochako would go back that soon. Great, I'll be there by around 6. She said before both of them said goodbye and hung up. Izuku looked at the clock on his phone. 3:45 p.m. It read. Just how much did I sleep? He asked himself. Ochako looked at the phone in her hand. A slight blush had formed on her cheeks. She hadn't expected to say that herself, but Izuku's bread was just too good to pass up. So, who was that? Ribbit, Suyu asked, beside her. Both of them had gone out for lunch and were aimlessly walking around when Izuku had called. Promoted stories. You'll also like The Kings and Queen Yandere Wakfu X Reader 56.2K 1.8 Kyonder. Wakfu X Reader. Images do not belong to me unless stated. Wakfu does not belong to me, it belongs to Enigma. This is being rewritten in another book on my profile. Mirko X Shy Male Reader 167K 1.1 Key. Don't own MHA. I hope you enjoy the story I made. Return of Mokuden discontinued 3.5K 45. This story is officially up for adoption. If anyone is interested, message me or comment on the story. Much needed love, Yandere Succubus Momo X Izu, 50.8K 797 after Wattpad had decided to delete this story out of nowhere. I and many reader were distraught. So I'm making a remake of the story from the ground up to compensate. Convicted Hearts 3530 like my other story but ILI longer. The hero who sings with a smile 38.4K 364 high. Guys, this is my first story I write on Wattpad. I hope you like it. After all. Ohm Fluke 11.4K 802. Will edit once I'm free. N. This is a work of fiction, and any similarity with other works is purely coincidental. Excuse grammatical errors and misspellings. Eng. Just a friend I met a couple of days ago. She responded nervously. Suyu then pressed her for details, so she gave away, narrating the events of the day before. He owns this bakery. A minus and I went there yesterday early in the morning to buy some bread. When I went inside I found him lying on the ground. He was sick so I took care of him. How did he get your number? Suyu asked, suspicious of Ochako's friend. I gave it to him when I left today in the morning. Ochako looked down as she said this in a low voice, her face turning redder by the second. Wait, Suyu said, looking at her friend in disbelief. You gave him your number and stayed the night. Ribbit. Why yes. You know he could be a pervert or something, right? He could have kidnapped you. Ribbit. Suyu couldn't grasp the thought of her friend doing so much for a stranger. I know. She responded, embarrassed, but I couldn't just leave him there. He needed help. You could have helped him and then gone home. Ribbit. Suyu said sternly. But Ochako didn't continue the sentence. She had no good reason to give, other than wanting to stay a little longer by Izuku's side. I'm coming with you then. Ribbit. Suyu said matter-of-factly. What? Ochako questioned, more embarrassed than anything. I'm just going to have to see for myself who this guy is. Ribbit. She said, more serious than Ochako had ever seen her. Oh okay then, Ochako said, admitting defeat. Suyu gave a triumphant smile and continued walking with her friend, whose face was still slightly red. They wandered around, looking at shops and simply chatting to pass the time. Both of them were already out, so they just had to kill time until 6 came. Soon enough, it was time. Ochako and Suyu walked to the bakery. Ochako excited to see Izuku again, she didn't exactly know why. He was just easy to get along with and to talk to, so she had enjoyed the little time she had spent with him. She knocked on the door as they arrived, the smell of freshly baked bread reaching their noses. She smiled at Suyu, whose mouth was already watering. Come in. They heard from inside, so they did. Izuku had wasted no time in getting to work. He was determined to make the best possible bread he could to show Ochako exactly how thankful he was. He kneaded the dough with twice as much care, treating it as if it were made of porcelain. As soon as the balls of dough were ready to be put into the oven, it was already 5:40, meaning Izuku had timed it just right. Ochako would arrive as soon as it was done. He was glad. The bread would be at its best when she arrived, freshly out of the oven. As he was getting the bread out of the oven, there was a knock on the store's door. Come in, he said, trying to finish up. Hello. He heard from the room adjacent to his. It was Ochako, of course. Hi, I'm coming right out. Wait a bit. He finished taking the bread out and proceeded to put it in a basket before grabbing it and heading out from the kitchen. Hello. Another voice greeted him as he came out, if only a little serious. I'm Asui Suyu, pleased to meet you. Ribbit. Izuku was surprised at the sudden guest he had received but didn't complain. After all, the more the merrier. I'm Midoriya Izuku. The pleasure is mine. He motioned them towards the table in the middle. Please, sit. Ochako and Suyu sat down and fixed their eyes on the basket Izuku was carrying. They couldn't see the bread, as it was covered with a white cloth, but it smelled so good that they couldn't wait to taste it. Izuku put the basket on the table and slowly pulled back the cloth, revealing the golden brown bread in all of its glory. Please, Izuku said, noticing the girls' faces. Eat. I'll go get something to put on these. He walked back into the kitchen. Ochako couldn't resist as she immediately grabbed a piece of bread, biting into it happily. Suyu held back, however, cautious of Ochako's new friend. Ochako closed her eyes as she enjoyed the bread, taking in all the warm deliciousness she could. A smile spread across her face. Izuku came back with some condiments, butter, ham, cheese, and whatever else he could find in his kitchen, setting them down on the table before them. So, he asked, how is it? It's so good, Ochako said, her mouth still full. Great, Izuku said, taking a piece of bread for himself and applying whatever his hand was closest to on the table, making himself a neat sandwich. It was only when Izuku took a bite off of the bread when Suyu started letting down her guard, though not completely. He swallowed and looked at Suyu. Don't you want some? He asked, worried that Ochako's companion had not liked how the bread looked. Suyu finally conceded, intoxicated by the smell coming from the basket in front of her. Ochako had eaten some. She noticed as she looked at her friend, who was now making herself a sandwich, and she was fine. This guy might not be that bad at all, she thought to herself, slowly lowering her guard. Suyu wasn't like this, but she knew Ochako could be gullible, so she didn't want something happening to her. Suyu bit her sandwich, taking in its flavor. She was completely blown away by how good it was. She'd never heard of this place before, but apparently, it was really popular in the neighborhood, according to what Ochako had told her earlier. Now she understood why. It just tasted so good. She unconsciously gave off a satisfying sigh as she finished the last piece of her sandwich. Did you like it? Izuku asked nervously. He had seen the girl's face as she looked at the bread earlier. He was worried she hadn't liked it at all. He swallowed nervously, not knowing what to expect next. Suyu did something he wouldn't ever have expected. She stood up and bowed her head in thanks to him. Thank you, she said, Izuku noticing her voice was less serious than before. That was a delightful experience. Ribbit. Izuku suddenly felt as if a giant weight had been taken off his shoulders. He was always nervous with new customers, but this case was special. She was Ochako's friend as well. Thank you, Izuku said. I'm really glad you liked it. Ochako watched the scene unfold before her, a small smile touching her lips as she saw the scene before her. Whatever Suyu thought about Izuku before, she was definitely not thinking about it anymore. After that, they chatted about several things. How their lives were as heroes, how Ochako had helped the day before, which only made Izuku thank her again, bowing his head in thanks as he spoke. Suyu finally decided that the boy wasn't a threat to Ochako at all. On the contrary, they would make great friends. Even she was enjoying the conversation. Ochako would occasionally make a joke that would make Izuku start laughing uncontrollably, which then spread onto the two girls. Both of them found themselves looking at Izuku. Even though all of them were the same age, it was obvious that he was way more mature than them. But on the other hand, he was still childish and shy at times, especially when Ochako would ask him questions about himself. It was as if he had been forced to mature very quickly, but with no one but himself to guide his path. After a while, it started to get late. So Ochako and Suyu decided to call it a day. Both of them got up and moved towards the door. It was a pleasure to meet you, Midoriya, Suyu said as she walked out. Maybe I'll come to buy bread at this place. A wide smile spread on Izuku's face as he heard that, satisfied that he had made another customer happy. Goodbye, Midoriya, Ochako said as she went through the door, waving at him. He waved back as they left, closing the door behind them. He immediately went upstairs. He felt beat. He hadn't had that much fun with anyone in. Well, ever. He lay down on his bed, happy that he had been able to spend a great day with these two amazing people. From that point on, Ochako and Suyu became regular customers at Izuku's bakery. Ochako would come by every afternoon she could, buying bread for that day and for breakfast while it was still warm. Suyu would tend to go in the afternoons as well, but not as many times as Ochako, opting to go by 1 or 2 times a week. It was one regular Wednesday afternoon, a couple of months after Ochako had met Izuku, where both she and Suyu found themselves outside of his shop, looking to go buy bread again. Much to their surprise, it was closed. Did we get here too late? Ochako asked. Looking at her clock, it was still 7, so they weren't late at all. She had always seen Izuku as a hard-working person, and she knew he wouldn't skip a day of his work, even if he felt terrible. As both of them stood puzzled at the front of the store, not knowing what to make out of the situation, an old lady approached them, catching their attention. Are you trying to buy bread? She asked. Today's his day off. Ochako guessed the lady was around 70 or so. She had seen her multiple times at the bakery, so she assumed she was also a frequent buyer. His day off? Ochako asked. She'd never heard of Izuku taking a day off midweek, except for the day she took care of the store for him. He was too determined and focused on his work he'd never let a day go by. The elderly woman nodded. Yes, he only takes this one off every year. It's his birthday. The woman said matter-of-factly as if they should already know about it. Ochako's eyes widened. He'd never asked Izuku about his birthday. She felt slightly disappointed in herself for this. But, it smells like freshly baked bread. Ribbit. Suyu had caught the smell as Ochako and the woman talked, wondering what it was about. Ah, yes, it is the present he prepares every year, she said, a soft smile on her face. Anyway, I believe you can find him right here. She pulled out of her purse a pen and a tiny piece of paper. She wrote down an address and gave it to Ochako. Thank you, she said. Is he still over there? He'll be there all day, sweetie, the elderly woman said as she started walking away from the girls. Ochako examined the paper. This is, she managed to say before breaking into a run, leaving Suyu behind, stunned. Dash 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 dot. Izuku walked through the grass with a neatly decorated basket filled with bread in his hands. A bright pink ribbon sat atop it. He looked around the place absent-mindedly. He didn't particularly enjoy being there. The memories it brought weren't the best. But he had promised he'd do this every year without fail. He had worked all morning on this bread. He had woken up at 7 before proceeding with his baking routine. He had prepared a single loaf of bread, but it was more than he needed. After all, he was only going to actually eat half. He had put flowers around the bread as well and topped everything off with a pink ribbon. As soon as he was done, he had headed out to his destination. The trip there would always bring him unpleasant memories of his teenage years, just as he wanted to enter high school. He wanted to ignore his thoughts, keep them away. He'd always fail. They would always find a way back into his head, whether or not he wanted. He approached the spot where, year after year, he would sit. It was nothing special. In fact, it was exactly the same as every other one around it. He already knew what it said, but it would still break his heart and threaten tears pouring out if he read it again. So, instead of doing that, he took the loaf out of the basket and split it in two. He left one of the halves next to the basket, on top of the rock surface, and took the other half for himself. He sat down in front of the rock rectangle on the floor. There was little space between it and the next one, but it was just enough for Izuku to sit in front. Here you go, Mom, he said slowly, as he bit slowly into his own bread. He didn't want to talk too much. He was afraid to start sobbing right then and there. I hope this doesn't disappoint you as it did back then. He bit into the bread again, watching the other half just sit there. He bit harder this time, holding back his tears. He didn't dare speak at all anymore, worried that his tears would start pouring if he continued. He simply sat there, even after he finished his own bread. He sat cross-legged on the grass, not moving a muscle. He just looked directly at the slab on the ground. Time passed. His legs started to ache. He didn't care. He deserved it as punishment. He simply sat there for hours on end, not tracking the time at all. The sun moved above him. It was starting to set. Izuku's eyelids slowly started to drop. He tried to stay awake but to no avail. This used to happen every year as well. He'd then wake up late at night, barely able to see the way home in the dark of night. Finally, after a couple of minutes, he drifted to sleep, completely exhausted. Ochako arrived at the entrance at around 9 o'clock. She had run to the nearest bus and took it towards the last stop. The traffic on the way there was bad. The time on the road had almost doubled thanks to this. She entered after the lone guard greeted them. Ochako had personally never been there before. Nothing as bad as that had ever happened in her life. Most of her family was still with her. She walked around as darkness engulfed the place. The guard had offered them a light which they gladly took. The place was the same everywhere she looked. The exact same rectangle stone slabs on the floor, grass surrounding everything else. Ochako wandered the gloomy place for a while, looking for her friend. After some searching, she found him. He was sleeping while sitting on the ground. In front of him was another stone slab with half a loaf of bread on top of it. At least that explains something, Ochako thought as she approached the sleeping Izuku, gently shaking him awake. Midoriya, it's pretty late, she said. You should go back home. Uraraka. He looked up at her, tears running down his face. She let out a surprised noise as she saw him. Midoriya, she said as she knelt down beside him, you okay? Izuku looked at her, but his gaze couldn't focus, his eyes lost. He tried to speak but no words came out, his head filling with memories from the past. He looked back at the stone slab and pressed his hand against it. He paused, trying to keep his composure in between his choked sobs. I just want her back. Ochako wrapped her arms around him, tears slowly falling from her face as well. She couldn't bear seeing Izuku this way, completely lost and devoid of hope. It's my fault, he said softly as Ochako embraced him, burying his face into Ochako's shoulder as he sobbed. It's my fault this happened. I'm so sorry. He repeated multiple times as he wept in her arms, his cries of grief filling the place. Ochako held him close, not letting go of him. She looked at the slab where the bread sat. It read, in memory of Midoriya Inko, a hard-working woman and a loving mother. May you rest in peace. 1976-2017. Chapter 4. You feeling better? Ochako asked Izuku, whose eyes were still red from earlier. She had continued comforting him until he had exhausted himself, unable to continue crying. She had held on to him tightly the whole time, which seemed like hours, stroking his hair gently and whispering comforting words in his ear. After what seemed like another hour, he finally detached himself from her and stood up, heading for the exit. They had been walking for a little while when Ochako finally asked him this. Yeah, he looked at her and smiled, then looked back at his feet. I'm sorry you had to see me like that. Ochako shook her head and moved closer to him, grabbing his arm as they continued walking. It's okay. There's no need to be embarrassed. She smiled brightly at him, happy that he was okay. Tears threatened to fill his eyes again, but there were none left. I haven't really had anyone there since she passed away. He was obviously referring to his mother, who had died that same day 3 years ago, the day of his birthday. He'd gone to the cemetery every 15th of July and spent the entire day there with no exception, trying to spend some more time with her. Ochako looked at her watch. It was 11:45 p.m., meaning that she had been there with Izuku for at least 4 hours. She looked at her friend, then remembered a vital piece of information she had received from the old lady she met outside the store earlier that day. Midoriya, she asked him, receiving a puzzled look from him. Happy birthday. He smiled weakly. It was clear that his own birthday didn't matter to him anymore. Gee, thanks, he said, his face turning a little red as he realized how close Ochako actually was. I'm sorry I don't have anything for you, she said while looking down. It's fine, Izuku quickly responded, waving his free arm in front of him in a dismissive gesture. I don't really celebrate it anyway, so it doesn't really matter. I'm going to make it up to you, she said, a look of determination in her eyes as she looked back up to her friend. I promise. Ochako's face was so determined that Izuku couldn't help but smile, a small laugh escaping his lips. Okay, okay, he said, only to make her stop insisting. She smiled triumphantly and held Izuku's arm closer to her as they walked back to the bakery. Are you gonna be okay? Ochako asked him. They spoke in the doorway. Yeah, I'll be fine, Izuku responded with a smile, trying to convince her, trust me. She wasn't very convinced but still nodded slowly, keeping her eyes on him as she walked away towards her apartment. Izuku went back inside the shop, closing the door behind him before moving to the second floor. He quickly got into his bed and buried his face in his pillow, letting out a long, tired sigh. He was completely exhausted. He'd never done that before. Every other visit to the cemetery was a lot more peaceful, but remembering the events again and then Ochako suddenly showing up made him lose it, bursting a bubble that had been inside of him for way too long, getting larger and larger in size the longer he kept it in. He hadn't even noticed its presence until today. He felt a huge weight get off of his shoulders as he finally let it all out, though he was still embarrassed it had to be in front of Ochako. His cheeks warmed up a little as he thought of her. She had been so kind to him in the last couple of months, always coming into his shop with a smile. As soon as she did, he felt as if all of the day's work was worth it. He felt a strange
Don't
feeling,
wipe your
one he'd
sweaty
never
hair on me.
experienced before, as she came into his mind. He didn't know what it
Don't
could
wipe it
be,
on my
he only
shorts
knew that
either,
he wanted
mister.
to spend more time with her.
Quit touching me.
He ran this thought around his head a couple of times but ended up confusing himself
I
even
said
more.
quit touching me.
Then again, he was too tired to even think straight, so he closed his eyes and welcomed sleep. Dash 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 dot. As much as Ochako tried, she couldn't fall asleep no matter what. She looked at the ceiling, a thousand emotions going through her head as she recounted the events that had happened that day. She'd never seen Izuku like that before, he just looked so lost. She sighed and rolled onto her side, seeing if that position would allow her to sleep better. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't get Izuku out of her head. A small blush started to form on her cheeks as she remembered his smile and his usual cheerful attitude. She felt a strange feeling well up inside her chest as she continued to think about him. He was always so happy when she came into his shop, smiling at her as she went through the door, making her heart skip a beat. She'd felt something like it before, but couldn't pinpoint what it was exactly. She gave up shortly after, her eyelids finally dropping. She hadn't realized how tired she was, she had been too worried about him. A soft smile touched her lips as she fell asleep with nothing but him in her thoughts. Izuku woke up earlier than usual. With the weight now off of his shoulders, he felt refreshed, filled with energy. He decided to get a head start on the bread, using the ingredients he hadn't used the day before to make twice the amount of bread he usually made. As the first batch started coming out of the oven, he noticed the bread's color looked better as well. Its usual golden brown seemed to shine more, the golden part standing out. Izuku wondered if he wasn't seeing correctly. He'd made the bread exactly the same way he'd made it every day. He just dismissed what he saw and continued putting bread in the oven. As his first customers came in, he greeted them all with the same smile he always did, offering coffee and bread to everyone. It seemed to him that most of his customers looked a lot happier than usual that morning. As he pondered why that was, one of his oldest customers came to him, an old lady that was about 70. "You look a lot happier today, young man," she pointed out. "Did that girl yesterday do something to you?" Izuku looked at her, his face completely red. I don't know what why you're talking about," he stuttered, which only made the old lady chuckle a little bit. "Sure you don't," she said, giving him a knowing smile. "Anyway, thank you for the bread." She walked out of the store after paying, smiling to herself as she did. Izuku looked at the doorway, puzzled. There was no way she would know about Ochako, she'd never even met her. He decided that the lady was simply talking about something else before he went back to his job. It felt weird to all of Izuku's frequent customers. He'd always seemed down or sad for at least a week after his birthday, but this time he looked happier than he'd ever been. No one knew the answer, but many of them would probably say that he met someone that had changed his life entirely. Izuku wasn't the only one who had apparently revitalized himself all of a sudden. Ochako seemed to change her daily routine a lot after she met the boy. She would wake up earlier in the morning and jog for a long while. She was especially attracted to a park that just happened to be in front of Izuku's bakery. She would spend a good hour there and then continue with her morning routine. Her coworkers seemed surprised by her sudden improvement in her mood. She had always been very happy and cheerful, but she seemed to be even more so apparently out of nowhere. Only one person knew why that was, and she decided to keep it a secret, as it appeared to her that Ochako didn't know herself. Sometimes, when she was feeling especially cheerful in the mornings, she would bring a bag of freshly baked bread for the entire office, receiving thanks and compliments from her coworkers as a result. They were all surprised as well that the bakery was only a few blocks away. And Izuku could never explain why so many heroes starting going by his shop all of a sudden. Dash 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 dot. It was one normal Friday afternoon then. Ochako had stayed behind yet again at Izuku's bakery. She did that whenever she had the chance. She liked spending time with him. Once he had opened up, he seemed to be a really cheerful and happy guy. He was easy to talk to as well, but found himself constantly stuttering or blushing when Ochako surprised him. They were both sitting on the table. The store wasn't officially closed. There were still some pieces of bread around on the shelves, and there were also a few customers who had hung back. Both of them were just chatting about anything that came to mind while drinking some of Izuku's home-brewed coffee. He spotted a man walk into the store, which felt weird to him. He was wearing a gray hoodie and a black beanie, both of his hands inside the hoodie's pocket, which also felt weird. It wasn't particularly cold outside. Well, maybe he's a new customer. I've never seen him. His thoughts were interrupted as Ochako stood up to greet him. Hello. Welcome to Izuku's bakery, she said to him with a smile, only to receive a shrug from him before he took one of his hands outside of the hoodie's pocket, revealing a long, sharp blade erupting from where his hand should be. Ochako's eyes widened in shock. She tried to get away from the man, but he grabbed her by the hair and pulled it back, exposing her throat. Uraraka. Izuku yelped, shocked at what just had happened. Look, I won't harm this girl if you do exactly as I say, the man stated. When no one answered, he pressed the blade a little harder onto Ochako's neck, drawing out a line of blood. Oh, okay, Izuku said, bringing his hands up in the process. Good, the man said, nodding his head in the direction of the cash register. Open it, he said with a threatening voice, now. He then tightened his grip on Ochako. Don't you try any funny business, okay? She froze. She could try to use Gunhead's lessons here, but she didn't know if the man would be fast to react or not, and, based on how quickly he had grabbed her by her hair earlier, she guessed it was the former. Izuku moved towards the cash register. He had to think fast. He could save Ochako and have the man do as he pleases with his money, or refuse to give the man the money and leave Ochako. The latter was out of the question. There was no way he would ever do something like that to her. So he decided on the first option. He had a panic button next to the register, which he pressed as soon as he could. Here, come closer so I can give it to you, he finally said, disappointed in his inability to do anything at all in that situation. Thank you very much, the man said as he took the money. Ochako was still in his grasp though. Now I'll be taking my leave, but not alone, of course. He looked at Ochako and smiled as he started walking back towards the door. Izuku's eyes widened. No, he said, gently picking up a couple of coins from the counter. I'm sorry, the man said, almost halfway to the door, the blade dangerously close to actually cutting Ochako. Izuku threw one of the coins to his left, hoping to distract the man. He did, momentarily taking the blade away from Ochako's throat. Izuku took the opportunity, jumping over the counter and throwing his remaining coins at the man's face, one of which hit his eye, who was starting to look back at him. The man flinched, bringing down the blade, which gave Izuku the opportunity to gently push Ochako out of the way and throw himself at the man. He pressed both of his arms on the man's bladed arm, hoping to keep him at bay long enough to let the police arrive. Ochako fell to the ground, but she was safe of the man's grasp. She sat up and looked at Izuku, who was pinning the man to the ground. Her eyes widened in horror as she saw the man's other hand changing shape, transforming into a large blade of its own. No, she yelled as she dived towards the man's free hand, that was aimed at Izuku's side. She got there a second too slow. The blade had sunk itself into Izuku's side, which caused him to let the man loose and fall to the ground. The police had just arrived as the blade came out of Izuku. Immediately 2 officers came in and restrained the man. Meanwhile, Ochako had placed Izuku's head on her lap. Uraraka, he asked weakly as he looked at her. It's gonna be okay, Midoriya. Don't worry about it. She assured him, tears falling from her eyes. Don't cry. Izuku smiled, only causing more tears to come out of her eyes. I'm finally a hero. Those were the last words Ochako heard before 3 paramedics picked him up and dragged him away from her. Where stories live. Discover now.